Everyone turned their backs on the paraplegic millionaire, until the cleaner's baby reached out her hand. While adults avoided him out of status or shame, a child ignored rules and simply touched his heart. The gesture became the target of gossip, scrutiny, and hatred, as if affection from someone beneath him were a crime. But it was that little chalk-stained hand that tore down masks, broke walls, and rewrote what a family truly is. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. The penthouse on the Upper East Side was one of those places that seemed designed to impress, not to welcome. Massive windows revealed New York City below, its lights flashing like promises that never quite reached that high. Michael Anderson knew every inch of that space, every shadow cast by the crystal chandeliers, every echo his wheels made on the polished marble. He also knew the weight of the silence that inhabited every room, a silence that wasn't peace, but absence. At 32, Michael possessed a fortune most people could only dream of. He had inherited his father's tech company at 23, when a car accident forever changed the course of his life. 9 years had passed since then, 9 years in which his body had become a prisoner of a wheelchair, but his mind had remained intact, sharp, observing everything and everyone with a clarity that sometimes hurt. Money, he'd discovered, was a kind of social varnish. It covered imperfections, disguised discomfort but never eliminated them. The people around him were polite, always polite. Rehearsed smiles, measured greetings, conversations that never went beyond the superficial. Everyone knew his name, his story summarized in old headlines, his market value, but no one really saw him. It was as if the wheelchair was an invisible dome that kept him separate from the rest of the world. The party that Saturday night was another one of those occasions where Michael played his social role, a charity event organized by his company, with Manhattan's elite circulating among canapes and glasses of champagne, all there to be seen and photographed, to fulfill the annual quota of charity that eased their consciences. He financed everything. His presence was mandatory, so there he was near the window, watching the guests as if watching a play whose ending he already knew. Sarah Davis was in the service kitchen when she got the order to take more trays out to the main room. She had been working for the event company hired by Anderson Tech for 3 months, always behind the scenes, always invisible. It was a job like any other, one that paid the bills and allowed her to keep Sophie, her 7-year-old daughter, in a decent school. That night she had no one to leave the girl with. The neighbor who usually helped was sick and Sarah couldn't miss work, so she did what many mothers do. She improvised. She brought Sophie in secretly, setting the girl up in a small back room with a tablet and some coloring books, asking her to be quiet and promising they'd be home soon. But Sophie was 7, with the natural curiosity of someone who hadn't yet learned to hide from the world. 15 minutes after being left alone, she opened the door and followed the sound of music coming from the main hall. Her eyes widened at the sight of the room, the elegant people, the sparkling lights. To her it was like stepping into a fairy tale. That's when she saw Michael, a man sitting in a different kind of chair alone by the window, looking out while everyone else chatted around him. Sophie didn't see a disability. She saw someone who was alone at a crowded party, and that seemed to her the saddest thing in the world. She crossed the room with the innocent determination of a child who hadn't yet learned about social hierarchies or invisible barriers. A few guests noticed, whispered, but no one stopped her. Sophie stopped next to Michael, tilted her head, and asked in a voice as clear as spring water, "Will you dance with me?" Michael turned his head, surprised. There was a little girl there, her hair in 2 braids, wearing a simple floral cotton dress completely out of place in that black tie environment. She was looking at him with a frankness he hadn't seen in years. No pity, no discomfort, none of that glint in people's eyes when they pretended not to notice his chair. "I don't dance," he replied, his voice rougher than he intended. "Everyone can dance," she retorted, serious. "My teacher says dancing is about feeling the music, not about your feet." Before Michael could answer, Sarah appeared like a contained hurricane, her face pale with panic. "Sophie, my God, what are you doing out here?" "I'm so sorry, sir, please, I'm so sorry. She didn't mean to bother you." The words tumbled out as Sarah tried to pull her daughter away, her eyes scanning the room for her supervisor, already calculating if she'd still have a job the next day. But Sophie resisted, holding onto Michael's hand with the stubbornness of someone who hadn't learned to give up easily. "I just wanted to dance with him, Mummy. He's all alone." Sarah felt tears burn her eyes, not for her daughter, but for the whole situation, for the fear, the shame, the accumulated exhaustion of months spent trying to stay invisible so she wouldn't lose another job. "Come on, Sophie, now," she insisted, her voice trembling. "She's not bothering me." Michael's voice cut through the moment like a sharp blade. Sarah looked at him for the first time, really looked, not as the distant boss or the rich guy in the penthouse, but as a man who had just defended her daughter. There was something in his eyes, a mix of surprise and something else, something she couldn't name. "What's your name?" Michael asked Sophie. "Sophie Davis, and yours?" Michael Anderson." "It's nice to meet you, Michael Anderson, so are we going to dance?" He looked at the little girl, at her mortified mother, at the guests who were now watching the scene with poorly disguised curiosity. And for the first time in a long time, Michael felt something other than emptiness. It was just a spark, but it was there. "I'll make you a deal, Sophie. I won't dance today, but I promise that one day I'll accept your invitation. How about that?" Sophie seemed to consider the proposal seriously. "Okay, but I'm going to hold you to that, you know." "I know you will." Sarah finally managed to lead her daughter back to the service area, murmuring apologies the whole way. She expected to be called in by her supervisor, expected to be fired, expected another door to close. But the night ended without incident. As she was leaving, well after midnight, carrying a sleeping Sophie in her arms, one of the security guards approached her. "Mr. Anderson asked me to give this to you." It was an envelope. Sarah opened it with trembling hands, expecting maybe a formal complaint, grounds for a lawsuit. But inside there was only a business card and a handwritten note. "Your daughter reminded me that there are still genuine people in the world. Thank you for that. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call Michael Anderson." Sarah read the message 3 times before putting it in her purse. She didn't know what to think. She was used to rich men who made promises, who offered help with ulterior motives. She was used to being suspicious. But there was something in those words, in that firm handwriting, that sounded different. Still, she decided to forget about it. It was safer that way. The following days were the same as the ones before for Sarah. Work, Sophie, bills, worries. But Michael couldn't forget. That little girl and her sincere eyes had pierced something inside him, a hole he didn't even know existed. The penthouse seemed even emptier now, the silence even heavier. It was Beatrice Anderson, his aunt and legal guardian since the accident, who noticed the change. She visited Michael twice a week, always on time, always efficient. Beatrice was 60, with impeccably styled grey hair and a posture that inspired respect and, at times, intimidation. She had taken responsibility for her nephew not out of family obligation, but because she loved the boy she had watched grow up. And because she carried old guilt she had never managed to exorcise. "You're different," she commented during their Tuesday lunch, watching Michael poke at his food with no real interest. "Different how?" "I don't know. Restless, maybe." Michael didn't answer. How could he explain that a 7-year-old child had done more for him in 5 minutes than years of therapy? How could he say that he had finally realized he wasn't living, just existing? "Aunt B," he began, using his childhood nickname for her, "do you think I could hire someone to work here at the penthouse? Someone who isn't just another invisible employee?" Beatrice frowned. "You already have a full staff. A chef, a driver, security, a physical therapist. I know, but I need something different. Someone to bring some life in here." Beatrice didn't like the tone of the conversation, but she didn't press. Not yet. She knew her nephew too well to know that pressure would only make him shut down more. It took Michael a week to work up the courage. Then he picked up the phone and called the event company. He asked for Sarah Davis's contact information. When he finally reached her, she answered with the tired voice of someone who had just gotten home from a double shift. "Hello? Sarah? It's Michael Anderson. Can we talk?" There was a silence on the other end of the line. Sarah felt her stomach clench. "Mr. Anderson, if this is about that night, I've already apologized. My daughter won't be coming with me to events anymore, I promise." "It's not about that. Actually, I have a proposal. I'd like you to come work here at my home." Another silence, longer this time. "Doing what?" she asked, suspicious. "As a house manager, an assistant. The title doesn't really matter. The important thing is that you can bring your daughter. I have more than enough space here. I can set up a room for you both. She can do her homework while you work. I'll pay you double what you're making now." Sarah felt her heart race. It sounded too good to be true. And when things were too good to be true, they usually hit a catch. Why me? There are thousands of qualified people in New York. Because your daughter reminded me of something I'd forgotten, Michael answered honestly. Because I need someone genuine here. And because I think you two deserve something better too. Sarah closed her eyes. She thought about the piled-up bills, the late rent, the night Sophie ate ramen noodles because it was all that was left at the end of the month. She also thought about the risks, the stories she'd heard from other women, the promises that turned into prisons. I need to think about it, she said finally. Of course, my number is on the card I gave you. Call me when you've decided. Sarah spent 3 days thinking. She talked to her neighbor, who said it sounded risky. She talked to her old boss, who said rich men always wanted something in return. She even talked to the priest at the church she attended on Sundays, who advised caution and prayer. But the one who really made the decision was Sophie. "Mummy, when are we moving into the new house?" the girl asked on Thursday night, as they shared a plate of rice and a fried egg. "Who said we're moving into a new house? The man from the party promised he'd dance with me one day. But he can only keep his promise if we're close to him, right?" Sarah looked at her daughter, at those eyes full of hope that hadn't yet been broken by life, and she decided to take a chance. Not for herself, but for Sophie, always for Sophie. The following Saturday, Sarah rang the doorbell of the Upper East Side penthouse with a small suitcase in one hand and Sophie's hand in the other. When the door opened, Michael was there in the foyer with a small but genuine smile. "Welcome," he said. "Welcome to what I hope is a new beginning for all of us." Sophie let go of her mother's hand and ran to Michael, throwing her arms around him in a spontaneous hug that caught him completely off guard. Michael froze for a second, then slowly raised his arms and returned the hug. And for the first time in 9 years, he felt that maybe, just maybe, life still had a few good surprises in store for him. Sarah watched the scene with a tight heart, torn between hope and fear. She didn't know it yet, but that moment would mark the beginning of a journey that would change all of them forever. Her journey of discovery, pain, resilience, and a love that none of them could have imagined was possible. The penthouse on the Upper East Side finally had living people within its walls, and the silence, slowly, would begin to give way to laughter, conversations, and new memories. But Sarah kept her guard up. She had good reason to be wary of promises, and time would tell if her caution was wisdom, or if she was missing the chance to finally belong somewhere. The afternoon sun streamed through the enormous windows, illuminating the light marble and creating patterns of light on the floor. Sophie let go of Michael and began to explore the space with curiosity, touching the furniture, looking at the artwork, asking questions about everything. He answered patiently, surprised by how much he enjoyed the commotion. Sarah, meanwhile, was still standing by the door, her suitcase at her feet, watching everything with heightened attention. Michael sensed her tension and approached slowly, respecting her distance. "I know you must be feeling unsure," he said calmly. "I know we don't know each other well, and this must all seem strange, but I want you to know my intentions are genuine. I don't expect anything more than what we agree on. You'll have your space, your privacy, and you can leave whenever you want. There are no traps here, Sarah, just too much loneliness and not enough hope." The words were simple, but they carried a weight of truth that Sarah felt resonate within her. She looked into his eyes, searching for signs of deceit, and found only weariness, an old sadness, and a timid spark of hope. Maybe it was crazy, but she decided to believe him. For now. "Okay," she replied, finally allowing her shoulders to relax a little. "Let's try." And so began the first days of a life together that no one yet knew where it would lead. Sophie brought color and movement to every room. Her drawings soon appeared taped to the refrigerator, her laughter echoed down the hallways, her endless questions kept Michael busy in ways he never imagined he'd enjoy. The girl didn't see the wheelchair. She just saw an interesting adult who knew stories about computers, companies, and trips she dreamed of taking one day. Sarah worked silently, efficient but distant, keeping her invisible shield raised. She made the meals, organized the house, and made sure Sophie wasn't too much of a bother. But Michael noticed. He noticed how she averted her gaze when he tried to start a conversation, how she always kept a safe distance, how her smiles were polite but never reached her eyes. He didn't push. He understood that trust wasn't demanded. It was built. And for the first time in a long time, Michael had patience. because for the first time, he had something worth waiting for. The weeks went by, and the Upper East Side penthouse stopped being just a luxurious empty space and slowly became something that started to resemble a home. But outside, in the company's hallways, at family lunches, in late-night phone calls, there were already those who watched this arrangement with calculating and worried eyes. And storms, as Michael and Sarah would soon learn, never give a warning before they arrive. The first month passed like a careful dance between three people, learning the steps to a choreography no one had rehearsed. Sophie was the most natural of them all, moving through the penthouse as if she had always belonged there. She gave each room its own name. The living room was the Crystal Palace because of the chandeliers. Michael's office became the Treasure Cave because it held computers and books. The balcony overlooking the city became the Stargazer's balcony, where she spent hours making up stories about the lights below. Michael discovered he had patience for things he never imagined. He started helping Sophie with her homework after dinner, surprised by how much he enjoyed explaining math and science to someone who looked at him with genuine admiration. The girl had a thirst for knowledge and a knack for asking questions that challenged even his most elaborate answers. Why is the sky blue? Who invented the computer? Why do people get sad? Each question was a door Sophie opened with the key of curiosity, and Michael found himself walking through those doors with an enthusiasm he hadn't felt in years. Sarah watched everything from a distance, always from a distance. She did her job with impeccable efficiency, prepared balanced meals, kept the house in order, but never completely let her guard down. When Michael tried to make small talk, she answered politely but briefly. When he offered to help with something related to Sophie, she thanked him but declined. It was as if there was an invisible wall around her, built brick by brick over years of disappointment. Michael didn't know it yet, but Sarah carried scars that went far beyond the visible. 3 years earlier, she had worked as a secretary at a law firm. The senior partner, a married and respected man, began to show interest. He offered to help with Sophie's expenses, promised to get her into a better school, spoke of a future where she wouldn't have to worry about money. Sarah, exhausted from working 3 jobs and still barely making rent, allowed herself to believe. She allowed herself to let her guard down. The truth came 3 months later, when he finally made it clear what he expected in return for all that generosity. Sarah refused. She was fired the following week on false pretenses. She lost the apartment she could barely afford. She spent 6 months living with a distant cousin, who made sure to remind her daily what a burden she was. Since then, Sarah had learned that promises from rich men always came with fine print, always had a price, and she was no longer willing to pay. That's why she kept her distance. Why she triple-checked that her bedroom door was locked at night. Why she never accepted when Michael offered anything beyond their agreement. It wasn't ingratitude, it was survival. But Sophie, in her fierce innocence, was tearing down barriers Sarah had spent years building. The girl had formed a real bond with Michael, and that scared Sarah in ways she couldn't name. She saw her daughter laugh with him, look for him when she got home from school, sit next to his wheelchair to tell him about her day. She saw the way Michael looked at Sophie, with a genuine affection that couldn't be faked, and that made everything more dangerous because if this ended badly, Sophie would be the one to suffer. It was on a Thursday afternoon that things began to change more noticeably. Sophie had a cold, a low-grade fever, and Sarah had asked to leave early from her weekend job at a coffee shop. She came home to find Michael in the living room with Sophie lying on the couch, her head in his lap, while he read a storybook aloud. The scene was so domestic, so naturally affectionate, that Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. "She's doing better," Michael said, noticing Sarah standing in the doorway. Her fever broke after she took the medicine. "I asked the chef to make some light broth." "You didn't have to," Sarah replied automatically, her armor back in place. "I know I didn't have to, but I wanted to." Sophie opened her eyes, still sleepy. "Mummy, Michael said we can plant flowers on the balcony tomorrow, can we?" Sarah looked at her daughter, then at Michael, and something inside her trembled. It wasn't anger, it wasn't fear, it was something worse. It was hope. And hope hurt. "We'll see if you're feeling better tomorrow," she said softly, going to Sophie and touching her forehead. The girl really was cooler. That night, after putting Sophie to bed, Sarah found Michael still awake in his office, working on his computer. She hesitated at the door, almost went back to her room, but something made her step inside. "Can I talk to you?" Michael turned his chair, surprised. It was the first time Sarah had initiated a conversation. "Of course, always." Sarah sat in the chair across from his desk, her hands clasped in her lap, her body tense. "I need to be honest with you about why I'm so distant." Michael said nothing, just waited. He knew any word from him could break the moment. "I've had bad experiences with men who made promises," Sarah began, her voice low but steady. "Men who offered help and then demanded payment in ways I couldn't afford. So I learned not to trust. I learned not to believe in kindness without a price tag. And I know that's unfair to you because so far you haven't given me any reason to be suspicious, but the scars are older than this." She looked at him, her eyes shining but tearless. "I'm not going to apologize for protecting myself, for protecting my daughter. But I want you to know that I'm trying. I'm trying to believe that this is real, that it won't turn into another sad story. I just need time." Michael felt the weight of her words. He finally understood why she kept her walls up, and he felt a deep anger toward whoever had hurt this woman, to the point of making her doubt all kindness. "You can have all the time in the world," he replied calmly, "and you can keep your walls up for as long as you need. I'm not going to force anything, Sarah. I'm not going to demand anything you're not willing to give freely. That was never my intention. I was just tired of living in a glass and marble mausoleum. You two brought life in here, that's all I wanted. Life." Sarah nodded slowly, stood up to leave but paused at the door. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for respecting my boundaries and for being kind to Sophie. She deserves that." After Sarah left, Michael stared at the door for a long time. He felt that something had shifted in that conversation. It wasn't full trust, not yet, but it was a start. A sliver of light through a cracked open door. The following days were different. Sarah still kept her distance, but it was a less rigid, less defensive distance now. She accepted when Michael offered to pay for an English tutor for Sophie. She allowed him to help her choose a better school for the girl for the next school year. She started having dinner with him and Sophie some nights, instead of always eating later, alone in the kitchen. Small changes, almost imperceptible to an outsider, but monumental for those living through it. Sophie noticed everything with the keen intuition of children. She saw her mother smile more, relax more, and that made her happy in a way she couldn't explain. One afternoon, while drawing in the living room, she asked Michael something that caught him off guard. "Do you like my mum?" Michael looked up from his laptop, surprised. "Of course I do. Your mum is an amazing person." "No," Sophie insisted, with the brutal frankness of childhood. "I mean, do you like her like a boyfriend?" Michael was speechless for a moment. He hadn't thought about it in those terms, not consciously. But hearing Sophie's question, something inside him stirred, acknowledging a truth that had been forming for weeks. Yes, he realized. He liked Sarah. He liked her strength, the fierce way she protected Sophie, the intelligence in her eyes, the quiet beauty she carried, without seeming to notice. "Your mom is very special," he answered carefully. "But these things are complicated, Sophie. Sometimes liking someone isn't enough." "Why not?" "Because there are a lot of things that can get in the way. Old stories, fears, differences. But you said differences don't matter. You said what matters is what people feel in their hearts." Michael smiled, caught in his own logic. "You're right. I did say that. So, if you like her and she likes you, why can't you be together like a real family? Because I don't know if your mom likes me that way, Sophie, and I can't push her to feel something she doesn't." The girl considered this for a moment, then went back to her drawing, seemingly satisfied with the conversation, but Michael thought about it for the rest of the day. Did Sarah feel anything more than gratitude? Was it possible that, in the midst of this strange and unlikely living arrangement, something bigger was growing? Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Beatrice Anderson was having lunch with an old friend at an elegant restaurant in Midtown. The conversation flowed between trivial topics until the friend, Clarice, touched on a subject that made Beatrice's gaze harden. "I heard your nephew is living with a woman and a child. Is that true?" Beatrice took a sip of wine before answering. "He hired a house manager who has a daughter. It's not exactly living together, it's a working relationship." Clarice arched a perfectly drawn eyebrow. "Darling, all of New York is already talking. You know how people are. And considering Michael's vulnerability..." Vulnerability, Beatrice cut in, her voice sharp. My nephew is a grown man perfectly capable of making his own decisions. Of course, Clarice backed down, but the poison had been planted. I'm just saying it would be wise to be careful. You remember what happened to your brother, don't you? Beatrice felt the past knocking at her door. Of course she remembered. Robert, her younger brother, had been deceived by a woman who feigned love but only wanted access to the family fortune. By the time Beatrice found out and confronted the woman, the damage was done. Robert had cut ties with his sister, married that woman, and died years later without ever reconciling with Beatrice. The guilt from that rift was something she carried like a stone in her chest. When she took over guardianship of Michael after the accident, Beatrice swore to herself that she would not let another gold digger take advantage of the Anderson family. It was her mission to protect her nephew, even if he didn't understand, even if it cost her the relationship with the only living relative she had left. After that lunch, Beatrice began to watch more closely. She visited the penthouse more frequently, asked subtle questions, paid attention to every detail. She saw how Sophie ran to hug Michael, how Sarah moved through the house with growing familiarity, how the three of them had dinner together some nights. And she didn't like what she saw, not because it was obviously wrong, but precisely because it seemed too right. And too right always hid traps, she believed. That's when she decided to investigate. She discreetly hired a private investigator, gave him Sarah Davis's full name, and requested a detailed report on her past. When the results came back 2 weeks later, Beatrice read every page with growing attention. Sarah's story was there in black and white. The pregnancy at 19, the child's father who disappeared, the years of financial hardship, the dismissal from the law firm. The investigator had spoken with Sarah's former boss, who painted a sordid picture. He said she was an opportunist, that she had tried to seduce him for benefits, that when confronted she had reacted with false accusations. It was a lie, of course, but Beatrice didn't know that. And her deep-seated prejudice, the fear of seeing her nephew deceived like her brother had been, clouded her judgment. Armed with that report, Beatrice went to the penthouse on a Monday afternoon. Michael was in his office working, and Sarah was taking Sophie to school. It was the perfect opportunity. We need to talk, Beatrice said without preamble, placing the folder with the report on Michael's desk. About what? About this woman you've brought into your home. Sarah is my employee, Aunt Bea, and a trustworthy person. Is she? Beatrice opened the folder, pushing documents toward him. Read this. Read about who Sarah Davis really is. Michael glanced at the papers, then at his aunt, anger beginning to simmer. You investigated her? Seriously? I protect you, Michael. It's my duty. And this woman has a questionable past. She was fired for trying to take advantage of a married boss. She has debts. She's clearly looking for a way to climb the social ladder. And you, in your naivete, are handing her everything on a silver platter. The words were like knives, each one cutting deeper. Michael felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and doubt. He didn't want to believe it, but there it was, in official-looking documents, a portrait of Sarah that didn't match the woman he had come to know. Do you really think a woman in her position wouldn't try to take advantage of you? Beatrice continued, relentless. Especially with a child to raise? Michael, you're vulnerable. Not just financially, but emotionally. You've been alone for years, and now a beautiful woman and an adorable child show up. It's the perfect setup for manipulation. Get out, Michael said, his voice low but charged with emotion. What? I said get out. Get out of my house. Beatrice was stunned. She hadn't expected this reaction. Michael, I'm just trying to protect you. You're trying to control my life like you always have. You don't protect me, Aunt Bea. You suffocate me, and I'm tired of it. Don't be childish. You'll thank me when you realize I'm right. Michael grabbed the folder and threw it in the trash, a symbolic gesture that made Beatrice take a step back. I don't need your protection. Not like this. Sarah and Sophie are the best things that have happened to me in years, and if you can't see that, if all you can see are threats and manipulations, then the problem is with you, not them. Beatrice felt tears burn her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. You'll regret this, she said, her voice trembling. And when you do, don't come looking for me. She slammed the door on her way out, leaving Michael alone with a whirlwind of emotions. He wanted to believe completely in Sarah, to ignore everything Beatrice had said. But the seeds of doubt had been planted, and they grow quickly in the fertile soil of fear and insecurity. When Sarah returned with Sophie, she found Michael different, more withdrawn, looking at her in a way she couldn't decipher. Something had changed, she could feel it, but she didn't know what. And as silence began to grow again in the Upper East Side penthouse, outside Beatrice was already planning her next move. She wouldn't give up, not when she was convinced she was saving her nephew from the same fate that had destroyed her brother, even if it meant destroying the fragile happiness Michael had found. The cracks were starting to appear on the surface of their delicate arrangement, and cracks, when left untended, always turn into chasms. The days following Beatrice's visit were marked by a silent tension that filled every corner of the penthouse. Michael fought an internal battle against the doubts his aunt had planted, while trying to maintain a normal appearance in front of Sarah and Sophie. But Sarah was no fool. She noticed every lingering glance, every strange silence, every hesitation where there had once been ease, and her old armor began to rise again, brick by brick. Sophie, with her sharp, childlike perception, also noticed the change. Michael was less present, less smiley. He no longer helped with homework every night. He spent more time locked in his office, and when he was with them, his mind seemed to be elsewhere. The girl didn't understand what had changed, but she felt the weight of the transformation like a stone in her chest. It was Sarah who broke the silence on a Friday night. Sophie was already asleep, and she found Michael on the balcony looking out at the illuminated city below. The air was cool, typical for June in New York, and she wore a thin cardigan that offered little protection from the wind. "Something happened," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Michael turned his chair to face her, and Sarah saw the conflict in his eyes. "Why did you never tell me about your old job at the law firm?" The question hit her like a punch to the gut. Sarah felt the world spin for a second. "Your aunt investigated my life." It was a statement, not a question. Michael nodded slowly, the shame clear on his face. Sarah closed her eyes, taking a deep breath before she spoke. "And what did she say? That I'm an opportunist, a gold digger? Let me guess. She talked to my old boss and he painted a wonderful picture of me, right?" Michael's silence was answer enough. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in the sound, only pain. "Of course, it's always the same. The rich, respected man against the poor, desperate employee. Guess who people believe?" "Tell me your side," Michael pleaded, and there was a desperation in his voice. "Please." "My side." Sarah felt the tears welling up, but she wouldn't let them fall. "My side is that I was 19 when I got pregnant with Sophie. Her father disappeared before I even found out. I worked in stores, restaurants, whatever I could find. When I was 21, I got the secretarial job at the firm. I thought it was my chance to build something better for my daughter." She moved to the balcony railing, looking down into the void. The senior partner started showing interest. It was subtle at first. Compliments, small gifts. Then it got more obvious. He offered financial help, promised a better life for me and Sophie. And I, God forgive me, I considered it. Because I was tired, Michael. Tired of not being able to pay the bills, of seeing my daughter eat ramen noodles 3 times a week, of going to sleep afraid of being evicted. "And what made you refuse?" Sarah turned to look at him, her eyes shining with contained emotion. "One day, I took Sophie to the office with me because her daycare was closed. She was 5. She saw that man kiss me in the hallway and asked if he was my boyfriend. I said no. She asked why I let him kiss me if I didn't like him. And in that moment, looking into my daughter's eyes, I realized what kind of example I was setting. I realized I was teaching her that women have to sell themselves to survive. So the next Monday I told him I didn't want anything more, that I would just continue as his secretary, as it should have been from the start. And he fired you. He made up a story about misconduct, about me trying to seduce him. He spread it all over the office. I was fired for cause, with no severance, nothing. I lost the apartment I could barely afford. I spent months sleeping on the couch at a cousin's house who despised me, all because I said no to a powerful man. The tears finally fell, silent but intense. And now I'm here telling you this story and seeing doubt in your eyes. Because it's always the same, Michael. A rich man's word is always worth more than a poor woman's. Always. Michael felt something break inside him, not for doubting Sarah, but for having doubted, for allowing Beatrice's words, for allowing that distorted report to plant even a single seed of suspicion in his heart. "Forgive me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Sarah, forgive me for doubting. I should have trusted you from the beginning." But Sarah was already retreating, her armor back up, stronger than ever. "No, Michael. You shouldn't have trusted me blindly. You should have asked me. You should have come straight to me instead of letting those doubts grow between us. Because now I know that all it takes is for someone to whisper things about me, and you'll question everything. And I can't live like that. Sophie can't live like that. That's not it, I swear it's not. Isn't it? Then why have you been so distant all week? Why did you start looking at me like I was a threat? Because deep down, Michael, you also believe that a woman like me would only be here for your money. That's not true." Sarah wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her decision made. "I'm leaving. I'm taking Sophie and we're getting out of your life. You can have your empty penthouse and your loneliness, but at least you won't have to worry if someone is trying to trick you." "No, Sarah, please." Michael moved closer, reaching out his hand, but she pulled away. "It's better this way, for all of us." She rushed back into the house, heading straight for her room. Michael followed, desperate, but Sarah was already grabbing clothes, throwing things into a suitcase in a hurry. Sophie woke up from the noise, her eyes bleary with sleep. "Mommy? What's happening?" "We're leaving, sweetie," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We're going back to our own place." "But this is our home," Sophie protested, tears starting to stream down her face. "I don't want to leave. Michael, tell her we don't have to go." Michael stood there, helpless, watching everything fall apart before his eyes. Sophie got out of bed and ran to him, hugging his legs tightly. "Please, don't let us go. Please." That moment would be seared into Michael's memory forever. Sophie's desperate cries, Sarah's broken expression, the feeling that he was losing the only people who truly mattered, and all because of doubts he never should have allowed to grow. Sarah finished packing, picked Sophie up in her arms even as the girl resisted, and headed for the door. Before leaving, she turned one last time. "I never wanted anything from you except a safe place to raise my daughter. If that was too much to ask, then I'm sorry for believing it could be different." The door closed, and Michael was left alone in the middle of the enormous penthouse. The silence returned, heavier than ever, because now he knew the sound of Sophie's laughter echoing through the halls, knew the smell of the coffee Sarah made every morning, knew the feeling of belonging to something bigger than himself. And all of it was gone. He called Beatrice, his anger exploding in words he never thought he'd say to his aunt. "You did it," he spat into the phone. "You managed to destroy the only good thing I had in my life. I hope you're happy." "Michael, I just wanted to protect you." "Protect me? You condemned me back to the hell I was finally escaping. I don't want to talk to you again. Not for a very long time." He hung up before she could reply. Over the next few days, Michael tried to find Sarah. He called her number dozens of times, but she didn't answer. He went to the old address she had given him when she started working for him, but the apartment was empty. It was as if Sarah and Sophie had simply vanished from the face of the earth. What Michael didn't know was that Sarah had gone back to her cousin's house, asking for temporary shelter while she looked for a job and a place to live. She slept on the couch. Sophie slept on a mattress on the floor. And every night she wondered if she had done the right thing, because she saw the suffering in her daughter's eyes, saw how Sophie asked about Michael every day, how she drew the Upper East Side penthouse with obvious longing. And then the scandal broke. A tabloid magazine published a sensationalist story with photos of Michael, Sarah and Sophie together during an outing to the park weeks earlier. The headlines screamed in bold letters about a vulnerable billionaire being manipulated by a gold-digging single mother and her daughter. The photos were there, taken from angles that made everything look sordid, calculated. Sarah adjusting a hat on Michael's head, Sophie sitting on his lap. Moments of genuine affection twisted into evidence of manipulation. The article featured interviews with people who claimed to know Sarah. Her former boss appeared, reinforcing his lying version of events. Old neighbors who barely knew her gave statements about how she had always seemed opportunistic. It was a public assassination, orchestrated with surgical precision to destroy any credibility Sarah might have had. The story went viral. Within hours, it was on every news site, being discussed on TV shows, generating heated debates on social media. Half the people defended Michael as a victim, the other half criticized him for being naive. But when it came to Sarah, The verdict was almost unanimous. She was the villain, the user, the unscrupulous woman using her own daughter as bait. Sophie started suffering at school. Classmates who were once friends now avoided her. Parents demanded she be transferred, claiming her presence was disruptive. One mother even confronted Sarah at the school gate, calling her a con artist in front of everyone. Sophie saw it all, heard it all, and something inside that cheerful little girl began to shut down. Sarah wanted to leave New York. She thought about moving back to her hometown in Ohio, starting over far away from it all. But before she could make that decision, she received an unexpected visitor. It was Beatrice Anderson. Michael's aunt looked different, older, more tired, carrying a weight that wasn't there before. Sarah received her coldly in the small living room of her cousin's house, arms crossed, posture defensive. "I came to apologize," Beatrice said bluntly, "for what I did, for the investigation, for the doubts I planted in Michael, for everything." Sarah didn't respond, just waited. Beatrice continued, her voice trembling slightly. "My brother was deceived by a gold digger many years ago. She destroyed our family, made him turn away from me, and he died without us ever making peace. When I saw you and Sophie with Michael, when I saw him happy in a way I hadn't seen in years, I panicked. I was afraid of seeing history repeat itself. I was afraid of losing my nephew like I lost my brother." Tears were now streaming down Beatrice's face, unashamed. "But I was wrong, completely wrong. I saw Michael after you left. I saw what your absence did to him. And I realized I wasn't protecting my nephew. I was destroying the only chance at real happiness he'd had in years." Sarah felt something tighten in her chest but remained firm. "And now? The damage is done. The reputation I spent years building was destroyed in one article. My daughter is being bullied at school. There's no going back." "I know," Beatrice admitted. "I can't undo what's been done, but I can try to help. I can use my resources to clear your name, to sue the magazine for defamation, to make sure the truth comes out. If you'll let me, why should I trust you? Because I love my nephew, and he loves you both. I saw that clearly, far too late. And because you deserve justice, Sarah. You and Sophie deserve to live without this weight." Sarah looked at this powerful woman, now humbled, asking for a chance to fix her mistakes, and she felt the exhaustion of carrying so much anger, so much pain. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was an opening. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's try." Beatrice got to work immediately. She hired the best lawyers in New York, filed lawsuits against the magazine, and everyone who had given defamatory statements. She managed to get Sarah's former boss investigated for sexual harassment, discovering that Sarah hadn't been his first or last victim. Slowly, painfully, the truth began to emerge. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened. Beatrice, in her attempt to legally protect Michael, had initiated a process questioning the informal custody of Sophie. The argument was that without clear legal ties, the arrangement could be detrimental to the child. What she didn't anticipate was that Child Protective Services would take an interest in the case. Suddenly, there was a real court battle over Sophie's custody. Sarah panicked. The possibility of losing her daughter, however remote, terrified her in ways nothing else could. Beatrice tried to reverse the process, but the legal machine was already in motion. Hearings were scheduled. Social workers visited everyone involved. Sarah's life was scrutinized all over again, now under the even more invasive lens of the justice system. Michael, upon discovering the lawsuit, was devastated. He searched for Sarah desperately, finally managing to find her through Beatrice's lawyers. When they saw each other for the first time in weeks, in the cold conference room of a law firm, the silence between them was deafening. "I didn't know about the lawsuit until it was already underway," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "Sarah, you have to believe me. I never wanted this. I never wanted you to lose your daughter." "I know," Sarah replied wearily. "But intentions don't matter anymore, Michael. What matters is what's happening. And what's happening is that my life has become a public nightmare. And now they want to take away the only thing that really matters to me. Then we'll fight. Together, we'll prove that Sophie is better off with you, that you're an incredible mother, that none of this makes sense. And what if we can't? What if the judge rules against me? They won't." Michael reached out his hand, hesitant. "Please, let me help you. Let me fix what I broke." Sarah looked at his outstretched hand, and felt the weight of all the decisions that had led to this moment. She could take that hand and accept his help, risk believing again, or she could refuse and try to fight alone as she always had. The choice hurt either way. But before she could answer, the door opened and Sophie came in, having slipped away from the social worker accompanying her. The girl looked from Michael to Sarah, and her small face both lit up and fell apart at the same time. "Are you guys fighting again?" she asked, her voice small. "No, sweetie." Sarah knelt, hugging her daughter. "We're just talking. I miss him, Mummy. I miss the house, the stories, everything. Why did everything get so bad?" Sarah had no answer. She just held her daughter tighter, feeling the tears stream down her face uncontrollably. And Michael, watching that scene, swore to himself that he would do whatever it took to bring this family back together, even if it cost him everything he had, even if the whole world judged him. Because for the first time in his life, he was absolutely certain of what truly mattered. And it wasn't the glass walls of the Upper East Side penthouse, not the fortune in the bank, not social approval. It was these two people, crying in each other's arms, who had taught his heart how to beat again. The months that followed were a storm that seemed to have no end. The custody case moved slowly through the judicial system, each hearing more painful than the last. Sarah had to relive the worst moments of her life in front of strangers who judged her every decision, every choice, every mistake. Social workers visited her home, wrote reports, analyzed whether she was worthy of raising her own child. The irony was cruel. No one had questioned her ability when she was alone and struggling. But now that there was hope for something better, suddenly she wasn't good enough. Sophie changed. The cheerful, curious girl who danced through the rooms of the penthouse gave way to a quieter, more serious child who carried a weight on her shoulders that no child should bear. She stopped drawing. She stopped asking questions. At school, she isolated herself completely, refusing to make new friends, afraid they too would judge her when they found out who she was. Sarah watched her daughter wither emotionally and felt a guilt that consumed her from the inside. Had she made the right choice by leaving the penthouse? Had her pride, her need to protect herself, cost Sophie her happiness? The questions tormented her during sleepless nights on the couch at her cousin's house, where it was made clearer each day that they were there out of charity, not love. Michael, for his part, transformed into a man on a mission. For the first time in years, he broke his self-imposed isolation. He gave interviews to major media outlets, laying out his side of the story with clarity and emotion. He spoke of how Sarah and Sophie had saved his life, how society's prejudice destroyed genuine families, how money created walls between people who deserved to connect. The interviews went viral, this time in their favor. He hired private investigators who unearthed the truth about Sarah's former boss. They found 6 other women who had been victims of the same man. With irrefutable proof, they not only cleared Sarah's name, but also ensured that the man faced real consequences. His arrest made national news, and finally some people began to question the narratives they had so easily consumed. Beatrice worked tirelessly to reverse the process she herself had started. She publicly admitted her mistake, facing the humiliation of explaining her motives in interviews and depositions. She discovered that protecting someone meant trusting, not controlling. It was a painful lesson, learned too late, but at least she was willing to learn. But the judicial system has its own pace, its own rules. While the lawyers argued and public opinion slowly shifted, Sarah and Sophie continued to live in limbo. Without a home of their own, without stability, without knowing if they would still be together tomorrow. It was on a grey September afternoon that the letter arrived. Sarah took it from the mail carrier with a heavy heart, fearing it was another court notice. But the envelope was different. Expensive paper, the elegant logo of an elite educational foundation. With trembling hands, she opened it and read, "The Prescott Foundation, one of the most prestigious educational institutions in the country, was offering Sophie a full scholarship, not just for school, but for her entire educational journey through university. Housing in their high-end facilities, psychological support, access to private tutors, international educational trips. It was the guarantee of a brilliant future, the kind of opportunity Sarah could never provide on her own. But there was a condition. Sophie had to cut ties with her current situation, which was deemed detrimental to her emotional and social development. In other words, She would have to distance herself from Michael and also live at the institution, away from Sarah. The letter used polite language, but the message was clear. They wanted to save Sophie from the family the media had painted as dysfunctional. Sarah read the letter 3 times before she could fully process what was being offered. It was everything she had ever dreamed of for her daughter. A quality education, opportunities, a guaranteed future. But the price was too high. It meant giving up being a daily presence in Sophie's life, admitting that she wasn't capable of giving her daughter what she deserved. She showed the letter to Michael that evening, during another meeting with the lawyers. He read it in silence, his face growing paler. "Are you going to accept?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know. It's an incredible opportunity. Maybe it really is what's best for her." "What's best for her is to be with the people who love her," Michael replied vehemently. "These people don't know Sophie. They don't know she's afraid of the dark and needs a nightlight to sleep. They don't know she likes to make up names for the clouds. They don't know anything about who she really is. But they can give her what I can't. Education, stability, a future. You can give her love. You can give her your presence. Isn't that worth more than the rest?" Sarah didn't answer. She was torn between her heart and her head, between love and fear. She decided to do what she always did when she needed clarity: talk to Sophie. That night, in the small room they shared, Sarah sat on the bed next to her daughter. Sophie was drawing for the first time in weeks. It was a simple picture of 3 stick figures holding hands: her, Sarah, and Michael, the family that could have been. "Sweetie, I need to talk to you about something important." Sophie put down her pencil, her gaze too serious for a 7-year-old. "Is it about the judge? Is he going to take me away from you?" "It's not that. It's about an opportunity. A really good school wants to give you a scholarship. You'd have amazing teachers. You could learn things most kids never get to learn. You'd have a guaranteed future." "But," Sophie sensed the hesitation in her mother's voice, "but you'd have to live there, and you'd have to stay away from Michael for a while." Sophie was silent for a long moment. Then she picked up the drawing she had been making, and with deliberate movements tore it in half. Sarah felt her heart ache at the gesture. "I don't want it," Sophie said, her voice firm. "I don't want a fancy school if I can't be with you and Michael. You always told me family is the most important thing, and they're my family, even if a piece of paper doesn't say so. But sweetie, it's your chance to have a better life. My life was already good, Mummy. It was good when we lived in the penthouse, when you smiled for real, when Michael taught me about the stars. You don't need an expensive school to be happy. You just need the people you love." Sarah hugged her daughter, the tears finally flowing uncontrollably. How could a 7-year-old have so much wisdom? How could she see so clearly what truly mattered when the adults around her were blinded by social pressure and fear? The next morning, Sarah requested a meeting with the Foundation's representatives. She, Michael, Beatrice, and the lawyers gathered in an elegant conference room. The Foundation's directors were expecting a positive response. After all, it was an offer too generous to refuse. It was Sophie who answered. The girl, who had insisted on being present, stood up from her chair and walked over to the Foundation's representatives with a dignity that impressed everyone in the room. "My name is Sophie Davis," she began, her voice clear despite a slight tremble. "And I thank you very much for your offer, but I don't accept." "Sophie, you don't understand what you're turning down," one of the directors began, but the girl cut him off. "Yes, I do. I'm turning down a golden cage. Because no matter how beautiful the cage is, it's still a prison. You want to separate me from my mom, from Michael, from everything I love and say it's for my own good. But how can something that makes me sad be for my own good?" She took the envelope with the proposal and, with firm gestures, tore it in half, just as she had done with her drawing the night before. "I already have everything I need. I have a mom who works 3 jobs to give me the best. I have a friend who taught me that wheelchairs don't limit hearts. And I have a family that I chose, even if you don't understand that. So thank you, but no thank you." The silence in the room was absolute. The Foundation's directors were speechless in the face of such an eloquent and firm refusal. Sarah was crying openly, proud in a way she didn't know was possible. Michael's eyes were shining, fighting to maintain his composure. And Beatrice, watching from a distance, finally understood completely what she had almost destroyed. That little girl, with her courage and clarity, had more wisdom than all the adults in that room combined. From that moment on, something shifted. Sophie's decision created an unexpected movement. Other families in similar situations, families formed by choice and not by blood, began to speak out publicly. The story of Michael, Sarah, and Sophie became a symbol of a larger fight against deep-rooted prejudices about what constitutes a real family. The court case began to swing in their favor. The judge, impressed by Sophie's maturity and clarity, by the documented positive changes in the lives of everyone involved, and by the public mobilization, finally issued his verdict. Sarah would retain full custody of Sophie. Furthermore, he authorized Michael to be officially registered as a shared legal guardian, recognizing the genuine bond between them. When the sentence was read, Sarah felt her knees go weak. Sophie shouted with joy, and Michael, who had spent months containing his emotions, finally let the tears flow freely. Beatrice, present at the hearing, approached Sarah hesitantly. "May I hug you?" she asked, vulnerable in a way she had never been before. Sarah nodded, and the two women embraced, not as rivals or adversaries, but as people who had learned painful lessons about love, trust, and family. In the following months, the rebuilding began. It wasn't immediate, it wasn't easy, but it was real. Sarah, Michael, and Sophie moved back into the Upper East Side penthouse, but this time with clearly defined roles and honest expectations. Sarah was no longer just an employee, she was family. Michael was no longer just the rich boss, he was a chosen father. And Sophie was no longer the child who had walked into that penthouse asking for a dance. She was the glue that held them all together. The house changed physically too. Sophie insisted on painting one of the walls of her new bedroom with paints Michael bought. The three of them did it together, creating a chaotic but beautiful mural of colors and shapes that represented each of them. Sarah formally accepted the position of co-director of Anderson Tech's social outreach programs, using her life experience to help other women in vulnerable situations. Beatrice became a constant but respectful presence, learning to be family without being invasive. She and Sarah developed a relationship of mutual respect, united by the love they both felt for Michael and Sophie. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of tension, of old insecurities resurfacing, but it was real. And real was always better than the fantasy of perfection. 2 years passed. Sophie was 9 when Michael threw a party at the penthouse. Not a party to impress Manhattan's elite, but a simple celebration for true friends and chosen family. The house was filled with laughter, music, life. Sophie, now taller and more confident, but still possessing that genuine essence that defined her, approached Michael in the middle of the party. "Do you remember what you promised me?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. "What's that?" "That one day you would dance with me." Michael smiled, a smile that was becoming more and more frequent. "I remember. You think today's the day?" "I think so." Sophie held out her hand, and Michael took it. A soft song was playing, perfect for the moment. He maneuvered his wheelchair to the center of the room, their makeshift dance floor. Sophie stood beside him, took his hands, and they began to move. It wasn't dancing in the traditional sense, but it was movement. It was connection. It was two people feeling the music together. Sarah watched from a distance, Beatrice by her side, both with tears in their eyes. The image of Michael and Sophie dancing, laughing, connected in a way that transcended physical or social limitations, was proof that love always finds a way, always. When the song ended, Sophie hugged Michael tightly. "Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for reminding me that promises are worth making," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. The party continued late into the night. When everyone had gone home and Sophie was finally asleep, exhausted but happy, Sarah and Michael stood alone on the balcony, looking out at the city below. The lights twinkled as they always had, but now they seemed different, less distant, less cold. "Do you think we're going to make it?" Sarah asked. "Keep all this together?" Michael took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I think we already have. Look at everything we've been through and we're still here. Me, you, Sophie, even Aunt B. We've built something no one thought was possible. A family that doesn't depend on blood, but on choice. On love. On the commitment to show up. Every single day, even when it's hard." Sarah rested her head on his shoulder, allowing herself to relax completely for the first time in years. "You know I love you, right? It took me so long to admit it, even to myself. I was so afraid it was just another illusion, but it's not. This is real." "It's real," Michael confirmed, turning to kiss her softly. "And it will still be real tomorrow and the day after and always, because we built this on a foundation of truth, honesty, and facing our fears and prejudices. And what's built like that doesn't fall apart easily." They stayed there until the dawn began to paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. New York was waking up below, millions of people starting another day, each with their own stories, their own struggles, their own hopes. And in that penthouse on the Upper East Side, 3 people whom society said could not be a family were proving that love is stronger than any prejudice. Michael's wheelchair was still there. It would always be a part of him, but it was no longer a symbol of limitation. It was part of the story of how he found his family. Sarah would always carry her scars, but now she knew that scars were marks of battles won, not of defeat. And Sophie would grow up knowing that family isn't about DNA or social conventions, but about people who choose to stay, who choose to love, who choose to show up every single day. Years later, when Sophie was a teenager, she would write a paper for school on the meaning of family. She would end it with a sentence that would make her mother cry and Michael smile with pride. "Family," she would write, "is who sees you when you're invisible to the rest of the world. It's who takes your hand when you think you're all alone. It's who dances with you even when the world says you can't. And that family I chose, just like they chose me." End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Michael, Sarah, and Sophie has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of love, resilience, and chosen family, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment resonated with you the most. Every day, we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest and truest side of the human soul, showing that love always finds a way, even when everyone says it's impossible. Your presence here makes all the difference. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode, with another story that will stir your emotions and make you believe that there is always hope, always a chance for a new beginning. Until then, remember, sometimes all someone needs is to be seen with the heart. Take care, and see you soon.